So today I just want to talk about three controllers that I've built using my 3D printer. Two of them are actually digital controllers, so you have to plug them in with a USB cable, and they actually work on basically any operating system, Windows, Mac, Android. And then this third one here is actually uh, built more specifically just for phones, where it overlays the actual existing touch controllers. So I'll talk about this one first, just because I think it's a little more interesting, or it's a little different than the other two. So you'll notice here that there are these metal nuts. These actually screw into, if we look on the underside, these little pads here. Now these pads are just replacement touch pads for like a touchscreen stylus that I was able to find online. They're pretty cheap. I think it was $10 for 10 of them, or $5 for 10 of them, or whatever it was. But you'll notice here that I'm actually missing three of them. I lost a few when I was building this. So if this was completed, you would have, so you would basically have buttons for all of these. So it would be four here, two for start and select, and two for L and R. So this is more akin to something like a Super Nintendo controller, and it can also be used for, Game Boy emulation, or basically whatever emulator has touchscreen controls. What's interesting about this one, again, it overlays existing touchscreen controls. When you push down on one of these pads here, or one of these metal pieces, pushes down the pad just enough that it makes contact with the actual screen of the cell phone. And you're going to notice, again, this kind of cheap blue strap here I have, this twist tie. I'm still working on a good way to strap this to a phone. Everything I've tried so far has been kind of funky, but this seems to work the best for right now. So what I can do is just kind of show you what exactly it does and how it works. So let's say, for example, we open up a Game Boy Advance emulator. So we'll see here we have the D-pad on the left, lines up with the D-pad on the phone, and then we have A and B lining up with these rightmost buttons. And then we also have the start button here. Again, I'm missing three buttons, so in theory we would have the right mapped to this one, the L trigger mapped here, and then select would be mapped to this empty hole. But again, just because I'm missing a few, I have to order more, then it would be complete. But what I can do is actually just show really quick how this works. So basically, we just slide this on over the phone, like so, and we're going to just want to tighten this strap on the right here. Oh, and we can see it's already unpausing. So this controller is a little funky. Again, it's sliding around a lot. It really isn't supposed to. In fact, it sliding around actually throws off the alignment with the buttons underneath. So, in theory, it would be tight enough that it's going to stay in place, but loose enough that it's not going to be pushing down. It's not going to be forcing these buttons to be making contact with the screen at all times. So let's see if we can actually line this up properly. Okay, and so right now I'm kind of just holding it with the pads of my hands here, just to hold it in place, but you can see, it is working. Again, it's a little weird, but it feels natural. That's really the most important thing about this controller. I'm not even looking at what I'm touching with a touchscreen. With just a touchscreen, I feel like I'm always finding myself having to look at where I'm pressing. But this, it gives, again, like a D-pad, I'm feeling where the D-pad is. It feels natural to actually want to touch a physical button when I'm playing a game without having to look down, kind of staring at the buttons themselves. And even just hitting the start button, like I need to pause it, I look away, and I can just pause and unpause. And that's really nice. Again, just sort of the intuition of having a controller without actually having a physical controller, or rather, a standard like analog or digital controller, like the ones I'm about to show you. So the pros of this, again, it's not using any additional power. Again, it's just, these touch pads here. So that's really nice because, you're conserving battery life, basically. It's also good for phones that don't support any kind of controller, so, it's something that doesn't support like a USB controller or it doesn't have USB OTG. So like an older phone that's capable of, running some decent emulators, but doesn't support a wired controller. Again, these are all alternatives to Bluetooth controllers. I'm not a fan of Bluetooth controllers. I think they tend to have some sort of input latency, and also just having to charge two devices, it gets a little annoying. So I basically built these to kind of circumvent that, and just you have everything being powered by your phone. So, again, there's no power being used by this controller specifically, which is probably the biggest benefit, honestly. So the next controller I want to go over are actually these two, what they call digital controllers. Again, they have to be plugged in, powered by the phone or the device that you have them plugged into. So these are basically the same thing. The only difference is that this one on the left is basically a prototype. I've never built anything like this before. I don't have a good background, or I don't really have any background in electronics or 3D printing. I basically bought the printer to build this controller, which actually this is the one that I wanted to build. So what I'll do is I'll kind of walk through the inside of this prototype just because I haven't fully put it together yet. And you'll kind of understand what exactly is happening here. And maybe it'll help you understand how to build it if you're interested in actually building one yourself. So what I'll do is I'll just peel back the tape, and we'll just lift the top up here. So you'll see that none of these buttons were actually in place. They were being held in by that top frame. So I'll just move those out of the way. And what we're seeing inside here, if you have any kind of background with circuits or microboards, microcontrollers, you'll see that there is an Arduino Micro, or an Arduino, yeah, it's an Arduino Micro, but this actually is just a clone. It's basically the same board, just a little cheaper because it's not made by Arduino themselves. And you'll notice that each one of these buttons here, so each one of these tactile buttons, they're all wired together via this black wire. This black wire is just ground, so they're all leading to a common ground pin on the Arduino itself. And the analog sticks, same thing. They both have a common ground mapped to one of the ground pins. We also have each one of these analog sticks has its own button, has a tactile button. Let's see if we can kind of zoom in on it. If you notice underneath here, there's again one of these same buttons that came on the actual board of the joystick. So we have all these buttons wired together with a common ground. Then we have each button wired to one of these pins on the Arduino. And then the analog sticks are mapped to, there are 4 analog pins, one for basically the x-axis and one for the y-axis of each joystick. So 2 axes times 2 joysticks, 4 analog pins. This is pretty straightforward to do the wiring. I'll try to link some information on that if people are interested, kind of how to go through it. The most tedious part again was just actually putting it together. That was painful. Doing the soldering, making sure everything works. The thing about this controller, why it's kind of still a prototype, to me at least, everything's hot glued in place. So I can't remove any of this without having to rip out the hot glue. And that was kind of an issue. I wanted to build these to be able to upgrade them or change out parts if something broke. So this one again was just a prototype. Do I know how to build a controller? And I modeled the controller, and I modeled each one of these components. So here you'll see we'll just have like a B button. We have A, B, X, Y, standard Nintendo controllers, standard Nintendo buttons, and then a D-pad. And I modeled everything using Tinkercad, which is just an online 3D software utility. And again, everything was modeled there. I modeled all of the components to make sure everything would fit before I printed the model, the actual 3D print. So, if we put the buttons back, then we can put this back together. One thing you might notice is actually this black piece sticking out. So there are 2 reasons for that. The first one, I've read online that these solder joints on the micro USB port on the Arduino, or the Arduino clone in this case, they're pretty weak. I didn't want to just constantly plug in, plug out, or plug in and unplug a cable directly to that, because I was afraid I was going to break the joints. So what I did was I bought this micro USB to USB-C adapter, hot glued that down. So now all the stress, or most of the stress in this case, is going to be put on this adapter, which is hot glued in place. The other reason for that is, again, this is using a micro USB port. I wanted USB-C to make it, really functional, kind of stand up to the test of time, as it were. So it's basically two reasons for that. So that's, again, this prototype controller. Now, the actual controller I wanted to build was something small form factor. So, just kind of for scale, we have the prototype versus the actual one that I had in mind, the design that I wanted to build. So they're roughly the same thickness, but in terms of actual size, much smaller. This one is closer to the size of a credit card in terms of length and height. In terms of actual width, it's kind of thick. And the joysticks I used are actually not just, standard game controller joysticks, but they're PSP analog sticks. So I wanted to make this as flush as possible, as low profile as possible. And these analog sticks don't have buttons as the other ones do, so you get the advantage of having actual trigger buttons, which feels, a lot more natural. So we have, A, B, X, Y, D-pad, start, select, LR, and 2 analog sticks, which is nice. And again, you still have that USB-C adapter in there, and the Arduino is actually pushed up to the top here. And you might actually be noticing this black strap here. Now this is actually the way that you mount it to a phone. So this one isn't using touchscreen, this is using, again, actual digital input. This is a real controller, So basically it mounts, now this is again a Galaxy S4. I'm using this just to show that these controllers work on older devices, legacy devices, and then also newer devices which use USB-C as, sort of the standard. But this is nice because, you're getting basically the PSP layout, but also it's in the form factor of a Game Boy. So what I can do is actually just bring up a few different emulators just to kind of show how this is configured. So what I'm going to use is just a micro USB OTG adapter. We'll plug that into the phone itself. We'll plug in a standard USB-C cable, one end into the actual controller. And let's actually put the phone back here. Now this one, we get the benefit that it will be pretty tight because we have the Velcro strap here. And let's see, let me just unlock my device. And we'll open up an N64 emulator. And Super Mario 64 is already loaded, so we'll just play that. And we'll plug in the controller, and the first thing you should notice when the controller plugs in, it lights up. So that means that it's getting power. And here we can see, all the buttons are mapped as you'd expect. The C buttons are mapped to this analog stick, which again just kind of feels natural. R is mapped here, Z is actually mapped to the left trigger, and then L is mapped to typically be the select button. So let's see, let's hop into a painting. And, again, the controller, it works as expected. Feels really comfortable, minus this cable. So I'll actually talk about that in a second. But, again, as you can see, Mario is running full speed, long jumps work, side jumps work, so it's pretty responsive. Viewing everything works fine. Using that, again, that's the C buttons mapped to the analog stick. Now this controller is a little loud. You can hear, the buttons clicking. That's a little annoying. So if I build this again or I work on a second model, I would definitely use some kind of softer buttons, or what I would like to do really is print out a custom circuit board, something similar to if you've ever taken apart a Super Nintendo controller. It's just a flat PCB with conductive pieces that you can, when you push down on the button, it's pushing down this rubber piece, so it's not going to be that, kind of annoying click, but rather just a silent press. Yeah, so this works great. Again, as I mentioned, these are PSP analog sticks, so we can check out actually a PSP game just to see kind of how that runs. So let me just open up Lego Star Wars. I'll load in a save file I have. And here we go. So, you can see that this is great for PSP games because, again, it's using actual PSP hardware. So it's kind of like emulation taken to the next step in a way, where we're emulating a system while actually using some of its real hardware, which I think is kind of cool. And again, it works great. It's honestly really comfortable, I think. So you have your hands, let's see if I can kind of show this. Basically, your hands are wrapped around the back here, and your fingers, your index fingers are on the triggers, and your fingers are kind of locked in the back. Let's see here. Sort of like that. So honestly, if you have, like medium to small size hands, it's not too bad. It would probably be annoying if your hands are really big. But I think, again, this controller is designed to just be compact, as compact as possible, while still being functional and somewhat comfortable. So what we can do is just unplug this for now. Now, I'm really excited about this project. I think this controller really did come out amazing. It works exceptionally well. Again, the only annoying thing as of right now is that I have this long cable here, and that kind of gets in the way of things. So what I tried to do was create a USB-C to USB-C adapter. So typically I would be using this controller on my main phone, which I'm using to record right now. And basically this would plug into the USB-C port on the phone, and it would plug into the controller that's mounted on the phone. So, it would be pretty discreet, pretty low profile. The issue with this, I bought these two USB-C, normal USB-C cables from the dollar store. I thought I could just wire them together and my device would recognize that the controller is not the host and that my phone is the host, but this for some reason didn't work. I have tested it with another USB-C cable that is capable of, just video over the cable, power delivery, and all that, and that worked fine. So I think it's really just an issue with this cable itself. I think I need to look more into that. If anyone has any ideas of how exactly, USB-C is done and how the host, if someone has any way of basically creating a small one of these where it uses USB-C host ability, let me know, because that would be really a lot of help. But yeah, so those are, basically the two types of controllers that I've built. What I like to call an analog one, touch overlay, and a digital one, which is, more traditional, plugs in, needs power. Now, again, they both have pros and cons. This one, I think, is better if your device supports USB OTG or, USB host. Also, what's nice about this is you can use it on Windows and Mac. So, let's say you're going somewhere, you don't want to take two controllers with you. You can just take this, again, this really low profile, small controller that's, again, half the size of a Galaxy S4. It's really small, and that was one of the main reasons. I wanted something compact. One of the main reasons why I built it. But, the cons, it's clicky, it's kind of loud. I need to figure out a way to build a better adapter. But this one also has, pros and cons. It doesn't require any power, works on any device, any Android phone. But, it's a little annoying and it's a little cumbersome to use where you have to line it up perfectly, but you can't make it tight, too tight where it's pushing these pads down on the display. So they both have pros and cons. I've been thinking about ways of kind of speeding up the production of these controllers. This one isn't too bad, but again, I don't have a finalized design of how exactly I'm going to do the straps for it. And this one, the actual soldering and putting it together, that took quite a while. It's not really feasible for me to sell these, to make multiple of these and sell them because of how much time I had to put in. I wouldn't be able to sell it for a cheap enough price that I think is actually worth it. So what I mean is I would like to sell these, something like definitely under $50. probably under 30 if I could. But the amount of time I would have to put into it, I would have to charge definitely over 60. And again, that's not what I'm trying to do. So I need to look more into this. Basically, I need to look into custom circuit boards to kind of speed up and avoid most of the soldering. Yeah, let me know if you guys find these interesting. If you're interested in the 3D prints, I can try to make those available. I can also link to some resources of how to do Arduino Joy-Cons or Arduino controllers, and also just some 3D print stuff. So yeah, thank you for checking these out. I think they're really cool. Let me know if you guys have any other comments on them.